All right, let's rock and roll.
Hi guys, Riley here from the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club, and here we were back again trying to complete this trail that ran from Chertsey up to Saint Donat. On this particular weekend, you can see I'm tail end Charlie right here. I've got new guy Super Dave riding in front of me, and up in the lead is Chris on the HP2. Now, we had been down this trail a couple of times before already this season. The first time we turned around because we didn't have our trail access pass, and the second time we turned around because we spent most of the day changing Chris's rear tire. It wasn't long before we got to the first real climb of the day, this long uphill. Once again, the old GoPro makes the earth seem flat, but this was relatively steep. I chose my line. There was a lot less rocks up here on the left, and I think Chris was thinking the same thing I was, because when we got to the top, we thought we might want to wait and see if Super Dave was going to make it. A little too much time had elapsed, so I set off to go see what was keeping Super Dave, and I could see he'd made it partially up the hill, and now he was struggling to get going, and it can be a bit tough to get the bike rolling when you've got no momentum and traction is at a premium.
Good day, sir.
And Dave didn't have a lot of experience under his belt at this time, so I just grabbed onto the crash bar and gave a little tug, and there you can see, if you hesitate,
Give her! More to give!
You can have a lot more trouble, but it's hard to kind of get over that initial fear, just to get your feet back up on the pegs. It's really hard to control that motorcycle when your feet aren't on the pegs, because you're just a 200-pound blob wiggling around on the seat.
Think you may want to lower that pressure.
So we decided to take some time and sort out our tire pressures, and it was probably a good thing we did, because we were really off on both ends of the spectrum. Chris was running way too little pressure in his front tire for these rocky conditions. He was somewhere under 15 pounds, which on a bike of the size of the HP2 was going to result in a bent rim.
31.
And Dave was still running his street pressures, which were somewhere over in the 30s, which, given the fact he was running a less aggressive tire that also had a hard sidewall, he was not going to have a great day either.
I have like no air.
In the rear shock?
Yeah.
Pump it, pump it, pump it. Are you recording?
And of course, what video would be complete without some footage of Chris pumping up the air shock on the HP2?
Wow, it's recording.
And usually I will do this for you, but I think most of the viewers of our videos are well versed enough now that they can come up with their own sexual innuendo here for what Chris is doing. How is it?
Yeah, 9 bar is 140. Anyhow, whatever.
Good.
Let's see what happens.
It's a ting of beauty and a joy to behold. Woo! Pump, pump the jam. Now I'm going to be singing that. Its only drag with this trail system here is it's friggin' rocks with side order of rocks.
Yeah, it does look like that.
But the nice thing with the rocks is, you know, and I was noticing when I was watching you, like you would come up sometimes and there'd be like a rock like that was sticking out a bit more, and you would avoid it.
Yeah.
Just drive over it. A big rock is like your best friend because it doesn't move, it doesn't roll, it's nice and stable. So as long as it's not sticking up enough that it's going to bang something, if it's right in front of you, just...
I always get in my head is I'm worried about that.
It's got to be...
This is pretty shitty.
But it's got to be pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so I mean, whenever I have a choice, usually if I see a bunch of rocks like that smooth one there, I'm like, yes!
Really?
Because it's not It's not these little rocks that the tire rolls on. It's just solid ground.
Now, what I was trying to explain to Super Dave there, which may not have been clear because you probably couldn't see what I was pointing at, is that when you're riding on the trail and there's these big embedded rocks that stick up an inch or two, there's no reason to avoid those. And in actuality, those are great because they're not going to move. They're not these little loose stones like you see us driving over here. So there's no reason for Dave to try and avoid those. To the contrary, when you have the choice of driving over a bunch of nice big smooth rocks that are stuck 2 feet into the ground, that's probably a better option than taking a chance driving over a bunch of fist-sized rocks that are just acting like oversized ball bearings. This whole section of the trail parallels a highway, so we're not deep in the woods here by any stretch of the imagination. And because we're parallel to the highway, at pretty regular intervals, there's cross streets that link up with the highway, so the trail comes to these little stop signs where you've got to sneak across these little side roads. And one thing we've come to figure out is when you're out in the country, the farther out you get, the less people are used to having traffic. So if you pop out of one of these trails onto one of these side roads, there's a real good chance if there's a local coming, he's not expecting to see anybody. Even though we hadn't been riding very long, Dave was just mentioning to me here how he was feeling a little bit of tension in his hands and forearms, and I think that was because he was having a little bit of a death grip on the handlebars here, so I tried to convince him to stay loose. It seems kind of counterintuitive. You're hitting rocks, you're swerving around obstacles, you're being kind of thrown around a bit, and everyone always tells you the same thing. Keep a looser grip on the bars, do not clench. And I think part of that also is just whether or not you're actually relaxed or stressed. And I have a feeling here Dave, given his level of experience, was just feeling a little more stressed than we were. Once again, I was waiting at the top of a hill climb for Dave, and too much time had gone past. So I decided to walk back and see what he was up to. And here he was. But obviously something had happened back there. And at this point, Dave didn't have a GoPro. So sadly for you, the viewer, I think you missed out on another fall. Some people have no consideration for others. It's only common courtesy that if you are going to fall down, you should be recording it, especially in the case of Dave, who actually found us through YouTube by watching our videos. This ATV would be the third one today we'd already seen, which is a lot. And as you can see, I waved and got no response. And we get a pretty varied response from ATV users on these trails. These trails are snowmobile trails in the winter, and they are maintained and organized by ATV clubs throughout the summer. But the ATV clubs have agreed to let us use them as long as we also buy one of their trail passes. But I don't think all of their members really understand that, because we get a lot of stink eye sometimes when we meet other ATV users. Part of that is I think perhaps they think we're there illegally. Here's Chris doubling back because now he's been waiting for us too long. And the other side of that is that when they do encounter motorcycles, most of the time it's not a bunch of 40, 50-year-old guys on big BMWs. It's the local kids on their 252 strokes who are, making a lot of noise and driving like maniacs. So unfortunately, we tend to get lumped in with them as well.
Well, not too much damage when that one fell over.
Oh, good.
Super Dave had actually stopped here to check out his bike to see if there had been any damage from that last fall. Eventually, Dave would figure out that these BMWs, once you've got the crash bars and the skid plates and the handguards on them, a little first gear tip over on a hill climb is not going to do anything except rub a little bit of paint off. It wasn't very long before we came upon one of the more memorable parts of this trail. And this is a section where they trucked in all of these rocks. And you can hear it. That stuff is loose. And they're a fair size, varying from golf ball up to grapefruit. But if you keep your speed up and you look ahead and you don't really overthink it, you kind of just float right through it. And Super Dave, who was in the lead, did just that, which was pretty impressive.
How do you like those rocks?
Oh, fucking awesome, isn't it? I don't know how many were on the road, how many were coming out my arse.
A little further along, we came to a section that was under construction. And you can see here what these clubs are doing. All of this earth was added here along the side of the highway, or at least scraped down and moved around to continue this trail. And when you see the budgets for some of these ATV clubs when they want to do something like that, it can amount to tens of thousands of dollars. So I certainly appreciate the fact that these clubs spend all of this time and effort doing this, and that's why I have no problem kicking in $100 or so every year for the rights to ride on their trails. Dave had already dropped his bike twice today on 2 other hill climbs, and there was another one coming up, and I was in the perfect position to see how he was going to do. And you can see, even within the span of one morning, how much more comfortable you can get by just overcoming your fear a little bit and laying on a little more speed, so that when you do hit a little obstacle or you get a little rear wheel slip, the bike just doesn't come to a dead stop and now you're trying to get going once again. The downhills, however, are a totally different sensation, and in a lot of ways I think they're scarier. When you're trying to climb a hill and you don't make it, you kind of grind to a stop and maybe you fall over. The downhills, I think, freak people out even more because you're gaining speed, and if the terrain is loose, you don't really have the option to use a lot of braking. That one wasn't too bad, but there'd be a few more on this trail coming up that would be a little more challenging. If you watch the previous videos, you'll remember that this trail actually uses the center median of the highway on a few occasions, where either on the left there's a massive rock outcropping like you're seeing there, and on the right there's some huge impassable swampy area. And in this particular section, the center was this nice loose sand, which was kind of fun. You can imagine that getting permission from the municipality and the highway department to do this kind of trail network takes quite a bit of political pull. And I think they can do it here because a lot of the locals use these trails, and also people coming in from the city to do snowmobiling and ATVing is a really nice chunk of change for these communities. There's something slightly unnerving about sitting on the side of a highway waiting for traffic to go by so that you can cross. And in this case, the trail would now run on this side of the highway for quite some time. Eventually, we came to the end of one of the ATV club's territories, and I think this is the beginning of a second club's territories. If you go to the Fédération Québécoise des Motos Hors Route website, you can actually see a map that has all of the ATV clubs that allow dual sport motorcycles. And I gotta say, those guys have been doing a really good job between Moto Trail Aventure, the FQMHR, of getting new clubs added on every year. So you can see the website address. I've added it here. I'll put a link down in the description below to where you can go to buy your trail pass, as well as see the map of all the clubs that now allow two-wheelers. Now let's take a look at Dave Once again on this hill, he's kept his speed up. He's chosen a nice line and coming up just ahead. Keep your eye on him. You saw the bike jump up there. There was a nice big embedded rock, and instead of trying to swerve around it, he just drove right over it. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Rocky?
Learning.
Rocky?
Very rocky.
So you said you took a scrape?
Yeah, fell off. It's one of those ones 3/4 up the hill, you know.
Oh, here?
Yeah.
Oh.
Not too much damage. In fact, yeah, oh, you've just rubbed off the scratch.
And you got your folding shift lever. Stop playing. Nice.
I did. Oh, look, and this. Look, I've
Ooh. And you got some double take mirrors? When did you get those?
For a while.
They've been on for a while?
They've been on for a while. The only new additions are the shift lever and the headlight guard. That's it. Yeah, I fell off right at the beginning.
Nice.
Right at the beginning.
Chris?
It's a cheese.
Geez, how's the ride going?
Good. It's great.
Not as much dust up front, I don't imagine.
No, not as much.
I got
think
dust
I might
too.
like to put a little air in my front tire. I had a couple like wallops on some rocks, and I'm like,
All right.
oh.
So you want me to break out the compressor?
Yes.
I'm a big fan of these plug-in air compressors. There's a lot of companies that sell them. This is one I bought at just a big box store, and then I modified the hose to have a clamp-on air chuck on it. I think they really beat either pumping by hand or having CO2 cylinders. And certainly if you run into a situation like we did the other weekend, where we ended up having to change the tire 4 times, CO2 cylinders definitely would not have been a good idea. As the morning continued, the trail was actually getting a little dusty. A lot of the times I like to be in the back. It allows me to keep an eye on everybody, and also it makes for a little more interesting video to have other bikes in the shot. But sometimes the downside is you end up sucking up a little more dirt than those guys out front. If memory serves me, we were now pretty close to the spot where Chris and I had turned around the time he had all the flat tires. Once again, a nice rocky climb, followed on the other side by a pretty decent rocky downhill. And once again, we're not deep in the wilderness here. If you look to the right through the break in the trees, you can actually see we are still paralleling the highway here.
Oh.
Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the times the downhills are scarier than the uphills, and I think Dave kind of fell victim to that here. He saw this big, long downhill with all these rocks. Once again, this big flat rock right in front of me, he should have just stayed on that because it was nice and solid. The stuff on the right was a lot looser.
See, that was a prime example. If you just stayed on the left and driven over those big smooth rocks.
No problem. But I tried, if you look on the video, I went on the left, the front slid off the rock.
Yeah, you were too much on the edge, but yeah.
Yeah.
He did some good dancing.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
He did some good.
Yes, I'm back on.
Well, we've made it farther than when you had your flat tire.
Yeah, well, my flat was back a little ways.
We're now on new trail.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Hey, and David, take a break whenever you want.
Yeah, you stop whenever you feel like it.
This was also one of the early rides where Chris and I had intercom. And it was not being used to its fullest because we weren't doing a lot of chit-chat on what the trail conditions up ahead were. Part of that was because we weren't used to the intercom systems yet, and I think part of it was because we were actually going at a pretty relaxed pace. So it wasn't like we were worried about the guy behind us being surprised by some obstacle in the trail. But if you don't have intercoms, I strongly recommend you check it out. It just brings an entirely new kind of level to the experience. I know some guys are reticent to try it because they're really into the kind of getting into their own headspace part of a ride. For me, if I'm riding in a group, I'm really interested more in the group experience. So it is really fun to be able to share the immediacy of what's going on over the intercom.
Well, if it were me, I would just ride left to left. Like,
Yeah. Left looks beautiful.
Dave was in front, and when he got to this long section, the slight uphill, and he saw all these rocks, I think he got a little freaked, so he kind of stopped to take a look at it. But as you can see, by just staying to the left here, you were avoiding 90% of the rocky, ruddy stuff in the middle. And then Dave stopped. One of the things I've learned is don't just stop anywhere. Take a minute or two to find a nice spot to stop because you're going to have to get going. And now we were on a bit of an uphill. Now what happened here was Dave had heard some sort of a big bang and he wasn't quite sure what it was, if he'd smacked the rim or bent something. Quite often the front wheel will throw something up and it'll hit the skid plate and it'll make a nice big clanging noise. Also on these 800s that have a center stand, if you hit the right sequence of bumps, the center stand can kind of drop down and hit things, or something will hit the center stand. Not a bad idea to stop and take a look instead of waiting to have a flat tire or for the oil light to come on. This really is a nice trail system, but at some point the rocks can kind of wear you down. Even if the sections aren't super challenging, it's just the constant pounding will get to you at some point. The more forest riding, where things are muddy and slippery, that for some reason doesn't seem to get on your nerves as much. It's a little more interesting maybe when you're slip sliding around. The rocky stuff, once you get over it and you realize that most of these big rocky sections, if you just kind of keep your speed up and your chin up, you can make it through them. You're just getting pounded. On some of these trails where you're just doing rocks all day, yeah, you know, it kind of becomes tiresome.
when we next stop, I'm going to check that front air pressure. I just feel it's going flat every time I hit a rock.
Well, let's just pull up here and we'll check.
Okay.
We got to this downhill section and Dave really slowed down, which kind of threw me off because I wasn't planning on going down that slow.
Hey,
If it had been Chris maybe on that left-hand side, I might have tried to pass him, but I wasn't sure what Dave was going to do. So I ended up going down this a lot slower than I wanted to, which made it a little chunkier. Here you can see some sand.
maybe you lost some air.
Oh, hard.
That's what it feels like.
No, your tire is hard. Maybe even too hard.
You don't feel in the
28.
Sorry?
28.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fine. In your head.
Could also be the center stand banging, eh?
Yep.
No, it's not. I can
You
feel
feel
it.
it? Well, it's,
Oh,
it's hard
I
enough.
can see the rock. It hits it. Bang.
It's
Yeah,
probably
it makes
here.
it bang.
It's probably in the suspension.
The suspension's probably.
Shit.
Flaccid.
Can I? May I?
Yeah, sure you can.
That's your problem.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, no.
Just, you might even want to take a little more air out of the front because it's probably pretty.
Well, Chris, try show them on mine now with the springs.
No, but your tires.
Oh.
Working a little harder, and I still got
Lots of
4 inches left.
Okay. All right.
You may need heavier springs. Should be on your shopping list.
There are springs in those, eh?
Yeah.
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 That's probably your best option is just put some heavier.
Yeah, it's
springs in the
95
front.
bucks.
Yeah.
And then at
You
least,
can't do anything else. There's nothing else you can do with those forks, really.
same with mine, I just have heavier springs.
Okay.
It'll
Alright.
probably raise the height just a tiny little bit, putting some heavier springs on, because you won't be causing so much.
Because I'm running 20,
I'm running 23 right now.
he's running 23, I'm running 24 on the same gauge, and my tire is actually smaller and softer than yours.
Okay.
And I'm not hitting anything.
Yeah.
And we're going the same speed, so.
Yeah, so just take it easier. Don't try to, try to avoid the big stuff. And
Super Dave is riding an F650GS, which later years would be called an F700GS, even though it had the same size motor as the F800GS. But all the silliness in terms of the naming aside, the big difference between those bikes and the F800s was the suspension. The bike is a more road-oriented version. It's got cast wheels. It has even worse suspension because the F800GS isn't famous for having fantastic suspension. And when you saw Chris rocking the bike there, he was able to suck up most of the suspension travel by, just pushing on the handlebars without too much effort. And then he jumped onto my bike, which has more travel from the factory plus the heavier springs, and you could see there was quite a marked difference. And to put it kindly, Dave is not the sveltest of fellows, so just his participation in the ride was sucking up quite a bit of his suspension travel. Our next obstacle was going to be this big hill climb that we had seen a few times from the highway, but I don't know if we'd actually ever ridden it. Something like this where there's a good chance people aren't going to make it up. It's not a bad idea just to wait and let everybody take their turn, because if you're riding somebody's license plate up and they bail, fall, don't make it, that's really going to jam you up. So in situations like this, we tend to let people go one at a time. And Dave had made it partway up and stopped, and then he somehow managed to get going again. Here you can see, though, that as nasty as it looked from the bottom, if you chose a good line and stayed to the left, it was pretty smooth sailing.
That was steep. Keep on keeping on.
Of course, to keep the universe in balance, for every good uphill, there must be a good downhill. Keep your eye on Super Dave out in front.
you all right?
Once again, the GoPro is lying
How's the
here
knee?
because this is quite steep.
Are you okay? Hold on.
Of course, Dave did not wait, and he He-Maned the bike up all by himself. He will eventually learn that you're better off
good?
just waiting for help. Up ahead there was a guy on some sort of sport ATV, but he was kind enough to wait for us. I walked back to give Dave a hand if he needed it. And here you get a little better view of the downhill.
Especially the better part of valor.
Push your bars.
Yeah.
When we got to the bottom of the hill, Dave realized his bars were twisted, and I've experienced the same thing. The bars on the 800 series bikes, the two clamps are not connected and they're rubber mounted, so it's very easy for the bars to kind of twist in the mounts. Sometimes if you just keep riding, they'll pop back. If not, if you loosen everything, they'll tend to straighten out and then you can just retighten it. If you go with something like the highway dirt bikes handguard setup, which is what I'm using now, you'll see that that issue just doesn't happen anymore because the two clamps are connected together. Here's another look at that downhill section. Yeah, you could see there's a few spots there you wouldn't want to fall.
Even the rubber glove for the
Customs?
the pre-enema.
Okay, so what are we doing here, David?
Putting my handlebars straight again.
And I see you brought the 5-round condom. David's bike now has more scratches on the plastics than mine.
Yes. That's because you didn't buy the.
That's
adventure
good work.
step bars. I think I win that one though.
Yes.
What, did I damage the bark busters there?
You took they're holding up amazingly well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're not covering all the plastic. But
No, but...
it's okay. It's not my bike.
Oh, and yay, look!
Oh!
Regardez ça aussi!
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, you may want to loosen that Torx before you ram her in. Although we have forced them in before.
Or
Eventually
you just leave it like that until you get home and then you deal with it later. Because you can't get... No, you won't get it in. You'll just round off the tip of that thing.
Just leave it. It's good when you're turning left anyways.
Mine have a permanent back sweep to them now because they just don't even...
That's good for more top speed.
Well,
Exactly.
I've got black touch-up paint, which will be good, but I don't have yellow, which is annoying.
Well, I'd give up on the touch-up paint.
Dave's bike was certainly collecting a few blemishes. The nice thing is that normally those blemishes always happen in the same spot. So once you've scuffed the paint off the top of the crossbar, the leading edge of your rear rack, and a few other spots, you can fall again and again and again, and it tends to be the same spots that get scraped off. So in the future, instead of scraping paint, you're just scraping rust off those already damaged areas. But he had scratched up his plastics above the crash bar. That's one of the downsides of those SW Motec crash bars. They're super solid. Lots of guys I know have used them to good effect, but they don't come up high enough to protect the plastics. If you see some of the videos where someone just lays the bike down in their driveway and they go, ta-da, look, the only thing touching is the crash bar, that's all fine and dandy until you tip the bike over and there happens to be a big rock there, or you throw it down a ditch and the wheels are actually higher than the handlebars. That's when the driveway test really doesn't mean too much. As you can see, this section was more like a road than a trail, and was thankfully pretty much rock-free. It was nice while it lasted, but eventually we were back to the rocks. Super Dave was in front. I was the meat in the manwich, and Chris was bringing up the tail. I was starting to get the vibe that Dave was getting a little tuckered out. So we'd have to keep our eye on him.
Ho, ho.
And that's when we came to a really gnarly, rocky downhill. I could see looking down this that this was going to be a little tough for Dave. Here you can see, from Chris's point of view, Dave trying to get going here. He stands up. He's going pretty slow. And then there he just tucked it. I think he just got on the front brake. And luckily there was some rocks in that ditch to break his fall.
That was almost slow motion. Are you okay?
Thankfully, Dave was okay. And being the trooper that he is, once again he didn't wait for help and he popped the F-bike back up on its wheels by himself, got right back in the saddle and headed down the hill. I think he was a little spooked though, so instead of riding it down, he decided to paddle it down. And I can tell you from experience that paddling it down sucks a lot of energy out of it. The bike is just a big 500-pound mass, and there's no easy way to balance it because you're not really moving, so you're using a lot of muscle.
You got
In
it.
hindsight, what we should have done
Oh.
was Chris should have probably ridden the bike down, or I
get up
could have
on the
walked
banks,
up and
you're
ridden
good.
the bike down. And that would have given Dave a little more time to recover, and he wouldn't have been so drained once he
All
got
right,
to
get
the
up.
bottom of the hill.
Stand up, stand up. Woo!
I think it was safe to say that Dave was done for the day.
You all right?
Yep. Everything's turned to jelly.
Yeah, let's take a nice break.
After a nice long break, we still had a bit of trail to do to get to a main road. Thankfully, the trail didn't throw anything at us that was too challenging, and within a few minutes, we were stopped on the edge of the pavement.
I think we're gonna call it.
Okay.
Let's head this way and we'll go grab something to eat.
Once again, we hadn't made it to Saint Donat. I think we made the smart choice. I don't think Dave had much more left in the tank, and perhaps we should have turned around even earlier. But we would be back. If you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button, and then you'll be the first to know when we have a new video coming out. And if you can, hit the like button. That also helps us get more views. You can leave a comment down below about anything at all, the bikes, the gear, anything we can possibly help you with. Don't be shy. You can also head over to our Facebook page, and that's kind of a fun spot. We hear from a lot of players from all around the world. And of course, if you want to contact us by email, you can head over to awesomeplayers.com, and you can even hit the order tab, and that would allow you to buy one of our Awesome Players stickers. Once again, thanks for watching another little adventure of the Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club.